The image of the ghoul has penetrated deeply into global popular culture, but its form is unpredictable. In the post-apocalyptic world of the Fallout video game series, they are mutated humans due to radiation, losing their reason and appearance, becoming a science fiction tragedy. In the fantasy world of Dungeons & Dragons, ghouls are a terrifying form of undead, carrying a vicious curse that can paralyze victims with just one touch. And perhaps the biggest influence in the modern era is when director George Romero initially used the name Ghoul to refer to the flesh-eating zombies in the classic Night of the Living Dead, 1968, a film that gave birth to the modern zombie image. It was Romero who laid the foundation for the popular confusion between ghouls and zombies, as both share the gruesome trait of cannibalism. This diversity, even contradiction in popular culture, raises a core question. What then is a ghoul? Where did it originate? The answer lies not in the radiation laboratories or catacombs of Western fantasy, but deep in the sands and folklore of the Arabian Peninsula. Both the creature itself and its name, from the English word ghoul, are directly derived from Arabic and Islamic culture. In Arabic, it is called ghoul, al-ghoul. It is a terrifying creature that appears in countless folktales and has been the subject of heated debate for centuries, dissected through theological, philosophical, and even rationalist lenses. Tracing the exact moment when the concept of ghoul arose is impossible, as with any folklore entity. However, scholars have proposed intriguing hypotheses of an even more ancient origin. There is evidence that the Arabic ghoul may be related to or descended from a terrifying creature in Mesopotamian mythology, Galu or Gala in Sumerian. The phonetic similarity is clear. Galu are not ordinary demons. They are specific, terrifying entities of the underworld, Kur. They act as enforcers or bailiffs of the underworld. Underworld, serving the goddess Ereshkigal. Their main task is to drag mortal souls down to the realm of the dead. In the Descent of Inanna myth, it is the Galu who follow the goddess as she returns from the underworld, ruthlessly demanding a replacement. They are described as knowing no food, no water, accepting no offerings. They are the embodiment of non-negotiable death. It is likely that over millennia of cultural exchange, this image of a ruthless life-snatching entity migrated from Mesopotamia to Arabia, transforming from an enforcer of the underworld into a predator of the desert. Whatever its origins, for the pre-Islamic Arabs, Jahiliyyah, rule was a tangible horror. To understand ghouls, one must understand the human psyche when faced with the Arabian desert. Places like Rub el-Khali, the empty corner, were not just a landscape, but a terrifying void, a place of absolute silence, of illusions and death. In this harsh environment, where survival depended on oases and the safety of caravans, being alone meant a death sentence. The desert was believed to be home to a myriad of forces belonging to the ghaib, the unseen realm, including jinn and rule. The ruins of ancient civilizations were seen as even more dangerous places, where the veil between worlds became thin. In that context, rule was seen as a dangerous and fearsome creature residing among the empty deserts and ruins. They posed a direct threat to travelers, especially caravans. This dangerous nature may be reflected in its name. The great lexicographer Ibn Manzur, in his 13th century classic Lisan al-Arab, The Tongue of the Arab, argued that the name rul, el-ghul, comes from the Arabic verb gha waw lam. This root has many ominous meanings. Ghala means to seize, to destroy, or to strike by surprise. The verb iqtatala means to assassinate or to kill treacherously. The name perfectly describes the ghoul's modus operandi. It does not fight fairly, but is a trickster and assassin. Rul's primary method of hunting is seduction. They do not attack head-on, but instead use trickery to separate an individual from the safety of the group. They may shapeshift, impersonate a lost traveler, a familiar, or even create the illusion of a fake oasis. Once separated, they are killed. There is a story told of Arqam bin Abdul Arqam, one of the companions, Sahaba, of the Prophet Muhammad. It is said that his son was kidnapped by a ghoul during a journey in the desert. The ghoul disguised herself as a woman, pretending to be the boy's attendant. This story taps into two primal fears, the dangers of the wasteland and betrayal by the familiar. This ability to shapeshift, tagawul, is one of the ghoul's core and most terrifying traits. Another famous story, often said to have taken place before he joined Muhammad's movement, concerns Omar ibn al-Khattab, who later became the second caliph of Islam. This story is highly symbolic, as it pits one legend, Omar, against another, the ghoul. Even before he became caliph, Omar was known by the epithet al-Faruq, the one who divides between right and wrong. He was renowned for his physical strength, stern demeanor, and sheer courage. It is said that while Omar was on his way to Syria, possibly on a trading trip, he suddenly encountered a ghoul in the desert. The ghoul asked him, "Where are you going?" Omar, in defiance, refused to answer. Refusing to speak to a supernatural entity is an important detail in folklore. Responding to them is often seen as giving them power over you or acknowledging their reality. Angry at being ignored, the ghoul is said to have performed the ultimate unnatural act. It turned its head a complete 180 degrees. This is a classic horror image, signaling a creature unbound by the physical laws of creation. Yet this action does not seem to frighten Omar. He simply draws his sword and kills the ghoul. What is important is the detail of the ghoul. He kills it with a single blow between the head and shoulder. This detail is not accidental. It reveals a key rule for ghoul killing in Arabic lore, a motif that would recur. This is called the one-shot rule. The legend states that you can only kill a ghoul with exactly one strike. If you strike a second time, something paradoxical happens. The ghoul will not die. In fact, some versions say it will revive and require 1,000 more strikes to be killed. This is the ghoul's final trap. After taking the first strike, it will feign weakness and beg for a second mercy strike to finish it. This act is a psychological test. If the warrior strikes a second strike, whether out of pity, fear, or a desire for certainty, they will fall into the trap. The first strike represents yaqeen, certainty, unwavering faith. The second strike represents doubt, hesitation, and it is that hesitation that breaks the magic of courage and allows evil to return. Omar's story, then, is more than just a demon-hunting feat. It is a moral. The ultimate weapon against the creatures of deception, who feed on fear and confusion, is not just steel, but a resolute and fearless will. Omar's single slash is the physical embodiment of that resolve. Clearly, in pre-Islamic Arabia, the ghoul was a widely accepted entity, a primal fear of the desert. They were creatures of darkness, embodying the dangers of traveling alone and the uncertainty of the wastelands. But the arrival of Islam in the 7th century brought a radical paradigm shift. Folklore could no longer exist in isolation. It had to be filtered through the prism of a new theological and legal system, culminating in the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, hadith. It is here that the status of the ghoul becomes complex and deeply contested. The first question any Muslim scholar, ulama, must ask is, what do the sacred sources say? The answer is surprising. The Quran, the text considered to be the direct, infallible word of God, is completely silent about ghouls. Not once does the name Rule appear. This absence is of utmost importance. For some thinkers, anything not confirmed in the Quran is immediately cast into doubt, seen as a legacy of the Jahiliyyah, pre-Islamic ignorance that must be discarded. The second area is the hadith, the records of the Prophet's words and actions. Here, the picture becomes much murkier. There are a number of hadith that mention ghouls, but their authenticity is the subject of intense debate. In the science of hadith, ilm al-hadith, each narration is strictly classified based on the narrator's chain, isnad, from strong, sahih, good, hasan, to weak, da'if, and fabricated, maudu. The majority of hadith that mention ghouls fall into the weak category. For example, some traditions state that the Prophet acknowledged their existence but also provided ways to ward them off, such as reciting the adhan, the call to prayer. A sanadad narration states that the Prophet again warned that, after they are gone, the ghoul will die. More famous hadith, recorded in the Sahih Muslim collection, one of the two most reliable hadith collections, appears to have denied their existence entirely. The Prophet is said to have said, "There are no ghouls." However, even this hadith is disputed, with many scholars interpreting that the Prophet was not denying the existence of the creature, but rather denying the superstitious notion of pre-Islamic Arabians that ghouls had the ability to transform indefinitely and kill at will. It was this lack of a solid foundation in sacred sources that opened the way for a variety of approaches and interpretations by later Islamic scholars. Some rejected the existence of ghouls altogether, considering them mythical. Others accepted them outright. And the crux of this divide lies in the relationship of ghouls to another entity clearly attested to in the Quran, jinn, God. While the Quran is silent about ghouls, it has a lot to say about jinn. There is an entire chapter, surah named Al-Jinn, chapter 72. According to Islamic cosmology, jinn are one of 3 intelligent creatures created by God, alongside angels from light and humans from clay. Jinn were created from smokeless fire, mari jinn min nar. Like humans, they have free will, irada, live in communities, have religions, some are Muslims, some are Christians, Jews, or atheists, and will face the day of judgment. Importantly, jinn are not demons in the Christian sense. They are not inherently evil entities. Like humans, they can be good or bad, friendly or malicious. Specifically, evil jinn are often called shayateen, demons, with their leader being Iblis or Satan. The English term genie is actually a transliteration of the singular form of jinn, jinni. Because jinn are so widely attested in the Quran and Hadith, believing in their existence is essentially part of standard Islamic faith, aqidah. Of course, philosophers and theologians have offered various explanations, even allegorizing them, but it is nearly impossible to completely disprove the existence of jinn. A reasonable question therefore arises. If jinn are real and ghouls are folklore, what is the relationship between them? Scholars do not have complete consensus on whether ghouls are a species of jinn or whether they are a separate creature. That said, the specific definition of jinn and the classification of different jinn, such as ifrit, marid, silat, are also inconsistent. Some view jinn as a very broad category, encompassing all invisible, ethereal creatures. Others have a much narrower definition. However, it can be said that, according to research, the most common view among Arab/Islamic scholars is that the ghoul is a type of jinn. It belongs to the broader category of jinn. The problem is that in addition to some common characteristics that we have described, there are many different and sometimes contradictory descriptions in the literature. In an article by Ahmed K. Alawi, he gives some examples of this confusion. Quote, according to Abul Wafa, the ghoul, rul, is the male jinn, and the female jinn is called alwa, or sitlat. Al-Jawahiri disagrees with this explanation and claims that the ghoul is a female creature, denoting the female shaman of the jinn. Al-Jawahiri also notes that the Arabs generally considered the ghoul to be a female creature, which fits with folktales of them disguising themselves as women. Jamar ibn Dur later mentions the term kutrub for the male ghoul, a name that also means madman or mad wolf, alluding to its chaos and animalistic nature. One of the most detailed and fascinating descriptions can be found in an extraordinary book from the 13th century, Ajayib al-Makhlukat wa Garayib al-Mawjudat, The Wonders of Creation and the Singularity of Existence, by Zakaria al-Qazwini. This is a monumental cosmological work, an attempt to compile everything in God's creation, from angels and celestial bodies to plants, animals, and cryptids. In a section on ghouls, Qazwini writes, the most famous of them, jinn, is the ghoul. They say that the ghoul is a strange and deformed animal who does not obey the dictates of nature, who travels alone, does not seek the company of others, and becomes bestial. It seeks out empty, desolate lands and can resemble both man and beast. It can appear to people traveling alone at night. They will be led to believe it is a companion, but then it will lead them astray from the path. What is even more interesting is that Qazwini offers a theological origin for the ghoul, tying it to Islamic cosmology. He writes, some say that when the demons, shayateen, wanted to eavesdrop on news in heaven, a meteorite fell on them. Some were burned, some fell into the sea and became crocodiles, and some fell on land and became ghouls. This story completely Islamicizes the ghoul. It is no longer a Mesopotamian Galu demon or a mere desert spirit. It is a fallen entity, a demon punished and disfigured by heavenly fire, bound to the most desolate places on earth. One of the earliest and most famous sources from the Islamic period comes from the great scholar, philosopher, and theologian Al-Jahiz, d. 869. He was one of the great thinkers of the Islamic Golden Age and a key figure of the Mu'tazila school of rationalist theology. He wrote a massive 7-volume zoological encyclopedia called Kitab al-Hayawan, the Book of Animals. In this work, he also discusses ghouls, but with a more taxonomic approach. In another article, the author Alawi quotes Al-Jahiz. He, Al-Jahiz, said that ghouls are believed to attract travelers by lighting fires at night. Then the travelers will be disoriented. Al-Jahiz elaborates by saying that people consider ghouls to be a type of jinn, and silat, or alwa, is a female jinn if she does not change or become a ghoul by deceiving the traveler. If a jinn changes form and alwa and harasses the traveler, it becomes a shivul, demon, or ghoul. This is a very interesting definition. For Al-Jahaz, a ghoul is not a species of being, but a behavior or a role. Any jinn, male or female, who performs acts of deception, shape-shifting, tagawul, and leads humans into danger is called a ghoul. This is a rational approach, viewing ghoul as a function rather than a distinct race. And the core characteristic of that function is the ability to shapeshift, a recurring theme in countless folktales used to warn travelers. Continuing Al-Jahaz's definition of the ghoul as a jinn with the function of trickery and transformation, tagawul, we enter one of the most famous and vivid folktales, a story preserved not in theological texts, but in the great Arabic literary anthologies. This is the legend of a pre-Islamic poet nicknamed Ta'abata Sharan, he who carries the devil under his armpit. This story is found in the Kitab al-Aghani, Book of Songs. Ta'abata Sharan himself was a figure belonging to the Sulik, that is, outlawed warrior poets, nomadic raiders known for their speed, endurance, and daring. It was this marginal status of society that made him a perfect candidate for encounters with marginal entities of nature. There are several versions of how he earned his nickname. In the version recounted, Thabit ibn Jabbar al-Fahimi, his real name, was walking in the desert when he saw a young ram, left alone. Thinking it had strayed from the herd, he took pity on it and carried it under his arm to carry it home. However, as he continued walking, the lamb began to become unreasonably heavy. This is a classic sign in global folklore, signaling an enchanted object or supernatural entity. The lamb became increasingly heavy until it became unbearable. When Ta'abata Sharan returned to his village, he threw the animal to the ground. When he looked down, he realized it was not a sheep but a ghoul. When his friends asked him what he was carrying under his arm, he simply replied, "It's a ghoul." From then on, he earned the nickname, the one with a devil under his armpit. What makes this story invaluable is not just the anecdote, but also a poem supposedly composed by Ta'abata Sharan himself describing the encounter. It is one of the rare detailed physical descriptions of a ghoul in ancient Arabic literature. I saw 2 eyes on a hideous face, like the head of a cat with a cloven mouth, and 2 deformed legs, along with the scalp of a dog. This description is crucial. It presents the ghoul not as an invisible entity or a ghost, but as a chimera, a chaotic combination of several animals. A cat's head, a cloven mouth, possibly referring to cloven hooves, a dog's scalp. It was a blatant violation of the laws of nature, a creature not following the dictates of nature, as Qazwini described it. Its disguise as a lamb, a symbol of innocence and purity, further highlights its core deceitful nature. And of course, Ta'abata Sharan, like Omar, killed the ghoul with his sword. This again reinforces the one-slash rule. As mentioned, this is a recurring motif in older sources. You can only kill a ghoul with exactly 1 strike. If you deliver a second strike, it will not die, and it may even require 1,000 more. This is not simply a combat trick. It is a profound psychological metaphor. The ghoul is a creature of deception. It feeds on fear, confusion, and doubt. The first strike, like Omar's, represents yaqeen, certainty, unshakable faith. When the ghoul is struck, it will use its final trick. It will feign death and beg, "I'm not dead, please strike me again and I'll be free." This plea is waswas, the whisper of doubt. If the warrior falters, if he doubts his own cut and strikes a second cut just to be sure, he has failed the test of will. He has let doubt creep in, and it is that doubt that gives power to evil. Al-Jahiz, in his Kitab al-Hayawan, also records this popular belief, although he does not necessarily endorse it. Al-Jahiz's reservations bring us to an important turning point in the history of thought about ghouls, the skepticism of rationalism. Not all scholars accepted these stories literally. There was a powerful school of Islamic theology known as the Mu'tazila, which flourished particularly in the early centuries of Islam, 8th-10th centuries. The Mu'tazila were champions of aqal, reason. They believed that God-given reason was the ultimate tool for understanding religious texts and the natural world. To them, many folk tales, including those of ghouls, seemed to go against the rational order of the universe. And one of the most famous figures of the Mu'tazila school was Al-Jahiz. Despite his compilation of ghoul stories, Al-Jahiz seems to have questioned their authenticity. He offered a surprisingly psychological and environmentalist explanation. He argued that these stories were most likely the result of confused people. A person traveling alone in the desert, a vast, silent, and harsh environment, would become tired, frightened, and prone to hallucinations. In a culture where a person is taught from a young age that ghouls are out there, the power of suggestion is enormous. They might see a rock, a bush, or an animal, like a hyena, in the twilight, and their exhausted brains would interpret it as a ghoul. Al-Jahaz essentially proposed a pre-modern psychological theory to explain supernatural phenomena. He even went so far as to suggest that many who claim to have seen or fought ghouls, such as the poet Ta'abata Sharan, were actually liars, or at least exaggerated storytellers, who fabricated these stories to gain fame and prominence. This is a classic clash in Islamic thought: aql, reason, versus naql, tradition and folklore. Yet while rationalist theologians debated the existence of ghouls, another literary form was quietly reshaping them: oral folk tales, culminating in Alf Laila wa Laila, 1001 Nights. This is a vast collection of stories compiled over centuries, with layers from Persia, Baghdad, Cairo, and India, all set within Scheherazad's famous frame story. If you've read any of these tales, you'll know that jinn figure prominently, like Aladdin's genie or the jinn trapped in the fisherman's bottle. However, in terms of the specific ghoul, the number of appearances is much less. But there is one story that has become the most famous and most disastrous in the sense that it completely changed the nature of this creature: Ghoul's story. It is the story of Sidi Noman. In this story, the main character Sidi Noman marries a wife named Amina. They are initially very happy, but Sidi Noman begins to notice a strange behavior from his wife. She never eats anything for dinner, except to peck at a few grains of rice. This is a classic motif in folklore to identify an inhuman entity that cannot eat human food. Driven by curiosity and suspicion, one night Sidi Noman decides to investigate. He watches Amina as she gets out of bed. To his horror, he discovers her sneaking off to a cemetery. There, she meets another ghoul, and then the two of them dig up a freshly buried corpse and start eating it. It turns out that his wife is a ghoul, or a sorceress, with shape-shifting abilities. Later, when Sidi Noman confronts his wife, Amina uses magic to transform him into a dog, and the story continues from there. This story has a few notable points. First, it points to the fairly common idea that humans and jinn, and even ghouls, can marry. Not all sources say ghouls are necessarily evil. Some say they can be good or bad, like jinn in general. Although Al-Jahaz would disagree, as his definition of a ghoul is a jinn who does bad things. But the second detail, the disgusting act that Amina engages in, consuming corpses. In fact, this has become one of the most commonly attributed ghoul traits and appears in a lot of popular culture to this day. But there is a problem. While traditional ghouls are certainly feared for their ability to kill people, the idea that they dig graves and eat corpses is a fundamental change. From a desert predator that preys on the living, the ghoul in this story has become a scavenger, a corpse eater, a grave raider. This is a crucial transformation, moving the ghoul from a demon of deception to a monster of impurity. The introduction of the scavenger in the story of Sidi Noman and Amina, as mentioned, is a crucial turning point. This is not just a variant, it is a fundamental change in nature. The ghoul in the Arabic tradition, from the Galu of Mesopotamia to the Rule of the desert, is a predator. It is an active enemy, a trickster, who uses trickery to hunt the living. It embodies danger, betrayal, and the fear of being alone. But the creature in Amina's story is a scavenger, a coward who sneaks around cemeteries. It embodies impurity, desecration, and terror of the dead. The question is, why this fundamental change? The answer, ironically, lies not in Baghdad or Cairo, but in Paris. When we read 1001 Nights, especially in the West, we are not usually reading a pure translation from a single Arabic manuscript. We are reading a work that has passed through an extremely influential editorial prism: Antoine Gallant's French translation, published in the early 18th century. Gallant, an Orientalist, had originally worked from an ancient Syrian Arabic manuscript. But when he finished translating the stories from that manuscript, his career, which had been bullied by the work's success, was in jeopardy. The solution came in the form of a Syrian Maronite Christian storyteller named Hannah Diab. Diab traveled to Paris and orally told Galland more stories. Galland was not simply a scribe, he was a writer, a recomposer, adding, embellishing, and changing details to make these stories, alien and sometimes obscure, more appealing to contemporary European readers. In fact, many of the most famous stories we associate with 1001 Nights come from Galland's version, and told by Diab, not found in the traditional Arabic manuscripts. These include Aladdin and the Magic Lamp, Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, and, significantly, the story of Sidi Noman. It is therefore very possible, even almost certain, that the detail of the ghoul digging up graves and eating corpses is an introduction of Galen's own. Why would he do so? He may have been influenced by his own European folklore. While the Arabian ghoul is a jinn of the desert, demons in European folklore, like vampires, revenants, or other graveyard spirits, are closely associated with cemeteries, churches, and the desecration of corpses. Galland may have combined the strange, foreign name ghoul with a horror trope more familiar to his readers, creating a terrifying hybrid creature. So while this is one of the most widely known traits of the ghoul, it is not a trait that originated in the original version of this creature, but rather a modern invention, or at least a hybrid of the 18th century. The impact of Galen's translation is immeasurable. Les Mille et Une Nuits, The 1001 Nights, sparked a craze for Orientalism across Europe. And with it, Galen's vampirized version of the ghoul permeated English and European literature. Charles Dickens, in A Christmas Tree, 1850, explicitly retells the story of Sida Norman, describing Amina as a ghoul and her scavenging behavior. In Emily Bronte's masterpiece, Wuthering Heights, the character Heathcliff is compared to a ghoul, with a specific, indirect reference to Amina's refusal to eat normal food. He seemed like a ghoul or a vampire. This shows how deeply Galen's particular story has penetrated the Western literary consciousness. From there, the ghoul took on a new life. It became a generic term for any creature associated with death in graveyards. This is the path that led to the ghouls we see in popular culture today. George Romero, when creating Night of the Living Dead, originally called his cannibals ghouls because they fed on the dead or dying, perfectly fitting with Amina's legacy. The ghouls in Dungeons & Dragons are undead creatures who haunt tombs and paralyze their victims. The ghouls in Fallout are mutated humans who live in ruins, scavenging and sometimes losing their minds, becoming feral ghouls, an uncanny resemblance to the ruin-dwelling outcasts of Arabian legend. The name stuck, but the essence was completely transformed. So, what happened to the original ghoul, the desert jinn, the shape-shifting trickster? It still lives on strongly in the folklore of its native region. One of the most famous and feared ghouls in the Muslim world today is Aisha Khandisha. Aisha Khandisha. She is a prominent figure in Moroccan folklore. Aisha Khandisha is a female ghoul, or jinn, often depicted as a beautiful young woman. She is especially said to linger around water sources, by the sea, lakes, or even the waterways in large cities like Fez. An interesting shift from the arid desert to oases and water sources, places both life-giving and potentially dangerous. She lures young men to follow her with her beauty. If they don't manage to escape, usually by reciting the Quran or performing a religious act, she kills them. And the only sign of her monstrous nature? Her feet, cloven like the hooves of a goat or a camel. She is the perfect embodiment of the classic ghoul, a female shapeshifter who uses trickery, beauty, to lure her victims to their deaths. Another terrifying story from classical Arabic sources, recounted by al-Isfahani, further reinforces the ghoul's image as a predator. It tells of two men who were shopping for a wedding dress for a bride. In the middle of the desert, they encountered a lone woman. She helped them and asked them to promise to visit her on their way back. When they returned, she accompanied them for a while. She stopped to relieve herself behind a mound. She disappeared for an hour. The first man went to check and did not return. The second man, extremely worried, went looking for them. As he climbed over the mound, he saw a horrifying sight. The woman was lying on top of the first man and eating his liver. The last man screamed and ran away, but the ghoul, the woman, chased him. In a strange twist, when she caught up, she helped him. She said, "To be safe from me, recite these prayers," possibly a reference to the hadith about using prayers to ward off jinn and ghouls. The man did so, and as soon as he finished reciting, the sky opened, a fire descended, and the ghoul exploded. This is a dramatic, strange story, and again shows that the ghoul is a predator of living people, eating the liver, the symbol of life, not a scavenger. Folklore, of course, is always changing and mutating. The ghoul has proven remarkably adaptable. But whether it appears as a radioactive mutant in Washington, D.C., a zombie in a European catacomb, or a corpse-eating wife in a fairy tale, its true legacy remains. The ghoul remains a prominent feature of the folklore of its birthplace. Perhaps not as widely believed in today as in other historical eras, but especially in rural areas where life is still tied to tradition, the ghoul is still feared. It is especially feared by those who live on the edge of the desert, where the quiet, desolate lands have always inspired awe and dread, and where this terrifying creature, Ghoul, has always been said to dwell.